All right, thank you, Andy. Let me make some quick introductions, and then we'll get started right away with some questions. I'll go from my left to right. We've got John Dews, who's a Chief Learning Officer at United Schools Network, a very successful charter network in Columbus. Dr. Darlene Chambers, who's the President and CEO of the Ohio Alliance of Public Charter Schools. Representative Andy Brennan, who is the Vice Chair of the House Education Committee. And Senator Peggy Lehman, the Chair of the Senate Education Committee. All right, now see, it's much quicker when I introduce them, because they don't have to say a bunch of things about themselves. So let's jump right into the questions. Let me start with Darlene. That's not a problem. So one of the recommendations that was made deals with authorizers, and you probably have more knowledge about authorizing, high-quality authorizing than anyone in the state. And you've been very active with the Department of Education as they're working on this new system. And Andy mentioned that it's been going, there's a lot of progress. Can you take just a minute or two to talk about sort of that, give a little bit more nuts and bolts on what the Department of Education is doing as part of that evaluation system and what promise you think it might hold, or not hold, whatever. I don't want to be leading.
First of all, there's a third report in case you're missing any. We've had a lot of reports. But if you've not had the opportunity, you might want to read the NACSA, National Association for Charter School Authorizers, report called Road to Accountability, and making some policy recommendations nationally. I'm very proud to say that Ohio got 18 out of 27 points. There is room for improvement. I don't know about all of you. I would like to get 27. How about you? But important in that report, that in the area of authorizer accountability, Ohio got a perfect 4 out of 4 in 3 of the 4 areas for accountability. Embracing NACSA standards, and it is a gold measure nationally. Giving an evaluation system to sponsors. We're one of the ones in the nation that NACSA is saying, take a look at that evaluation. They helped build it, by the way. And the third part was giving sanctions to authorizers. So truly, if you read the NACSA report, authorizers have stepped up to the plate. There's already improvement happening. And we can give a lot of the credit to the sponsor evaluation system. We can also give a lot of credit to our legislature for removing the diminishing cap that I'm yet to understand way back in 2010. There was a disincentive for authorizers to close schools before 2010. So as you look at the chart of all our performances and you wonder about those authorizers, Ohio law was part of the problem. Now the good news is, the diminishing cap, where you got a school charter taken away from you as an authorizer, if you closed a school properly for poor performance or financial issues, is gone. Authorizers have really improved, and the trajectory of improvement since 2010 is truly phenomenal. Thanks to all the folks in the room that have something to do with the sponsor performance review. When I was an executive director of an authorizer, we went through it. We volunteered, first one through it. I wasn't thanking people so much then. It is a rigorous process. But what I'm proud of is immediately after going through that review, I personally watched an authorizer change the processes and make themselves more transparent. There's a whole group of people that built it in Ohio, including ODE, the Ohio Association of Charter School Authorizers. There have been 5 schools that have already gone through it. We're seeing results already. It's one of those laws that I want to say to all of you in the room. Let's let the ink dry on the new sponsor review system, which includes ranking sponsors by the portfolio of their school performance in performance index and value added. Do you do what you were created to do, compliance and oversight? And most importantly, my favorite part, probably the hardest part, is do you have capacity and commitment to deliver authorizing with quality? So if we allow the ink to dry on that law, I think we're going to see a lot of solutions already without any fixes in the future.
Thank you. Let's see, John. You're on the leadership team, as I mentioned in your intro, of a high-performing school. Are there things in our state's charter law right now that have prevented or slowed down your school's ability to replicate and grow? Because that's one of the things I know that Andy noted, that we've got some fantastic schools all over the state. But unlike in some other places, we haven't yet had sort of the growth that you would expect to see when schools are really helping kids to the level that schools like yours are.
Yeah, I would say probably, thinking about that question, there's probably three things. Andy mentioned two of the three in his presentation. And one's a byproduct of some of the problems that he pointed out. The first thing is funding. You know, it's really hard for us to replicate when we're facing such a deficit in funds. So, you know, not only is that troubling when we think about, you know, how we pay teachers and buying all the things that schools need to buy, but it also, you know, impacts how we can pay teachers and how long teachers can see themselves working at our school, because they're, you know, surrounded by districts that pay much higher salaries, especially as you get into years of service. The second thing would be facilities. It's been really, really difficult to find buildings that will operate as schools. And we've been lucky. We have a good partnership with Columbus City Schools, and we've purchased two of their buildings that had sat empty. So I feel fortunate in that respect. But I also, you know, look at those buildings. They need a lot of work. They're both at least 50 years old. One's 100 years old. So there's quite a bit that needs to be done to keep those buildings running and safe for kids and all those types of things. And I would say the third thing, because of, you know, how many charter schools there are in Columbus and Ohio in particular, I think it makes it difficult for parents to figure out where quality is and where it isn't. You know, there's lots of information out there, but finding the right information and wading through that is not easy. And on top of that, you know, I think to Howard Fuller, who's a proponent of school choice nationally, he talks about happy schools where teachers are happy and principals are happy and parents are happy and kids are happy, but nobody's learning. I think there's a good number of those types of schools out there too. And you know, we're all about providing high quality education for kids. And you know, most of the kids that we serve are students of color that are economically disadvantaged. And when you throw on top of that, our schools are being funded at such a lower rate, it just seems like we're kind of harkening back to separate and unequal schools for those kids.
Thank you. Now let's ask our elected leaders a question. I could ask many pointed ones, but I think it might be wise to get some of their reactions to this report, just sort of generally. Is there a thing or two that resonates, or a thing or two that sort of falls short in sort of what you've seen and what you've heard this morning? And I'll just pass the microphone down and let you guys fight over it. So I don't have to choose.
I think the report verifies what a lot of us have been hearing and seeing in the report card. And I think there was probably a lot of hope that they would discover reasons why our charter sector is not performing better that would make us just feel better about it and say, well, you know, it's really okay. The report just didn't tell us this or that. It didn't do that. I think it really challenges us. The thing that I found most encouraging, frankly, out of the report is that charter schools can do very well. And we are seeing that in other states. So fundamentally, the problem is not charter schools or the entire philosophy behind charter schools, but rather how they have developed here in the state of Ohio, which is something we can fix. And that to me is good news. It's not going to be easy to fix the things that Andy has identified. Excuse me. This will be a very, very heavy lift. But for people who really care about charter schools and school choice and keeping this a live and growing and prospering movement, we need to sometimes lay aside our personal ways that this legislation or any legislation that should come from it might affect us personally and look at the bigger picture. And I think if we can look at the bigger picture and work together to improve the way the charter schools are run in Ohio, that we can end up being right up there with the Boston. What were some of the others? Newark was a huge one, and a lot of states and a lot of big cities where charter schools are making a huge difference in kids' lives.
Thank you. I read the report. I actually glanced through the Massachusetts report while we were sitting here. Yeah, I don't think there's anything there that we necessarily are surprised about or we should be surprised about. I don't think the charter schools are really that bad. I mean, if you compare Ohio to Massachusetts, I don't think you can. I think Ohio is a much broader state. It's a larger state. We have about 3-4 times the number of charter school students in Massachusetts. So, you know, I'm not really sure we're comparing apples to apples there. The transportation system, if you go to any public school, they're going to complain if you're in a rural area about the transportation system. So I think overall, we need to reconsider transportation in general and how we're transporting all the students in the state of Ohio. We have 613 public school districts, and you've got 613 public transportation systems that are, you know, I don't think I go 1 week in office where I don't get a complaint from a constituent about the fact that the local school system, which actually is one of the, in my case, some of the richest school systems in the state of Ohio, are doing everything they can to pinch off every little bit of money they can for a student transportation to go to an alternative school. And that's obvious because public schools are still, for the most part, I mean, they're given essentially a franchise. And it's a public franchise and it's a monopoly. So until that changes, until we take a look at the overall transportation in general and just take that away from the schools and say transportation is going to be done for all students, regardless of which district, and handle that, I think you're going to have those problems and you're going to continue to go, and they're still going to be squabbling over the funding. As far as the performance results, you know, when you've got public schools have an incentive to beat up on the charters, and yet they've also got the incentive to unload all the students that are causing problems under the charters, you're going to continue to have this. And when you've got a state like ours, which has, you know, about 108,000 students in some of the public charters versus about 26,000, 27,000 in Massachusetts, for example, you know, I'm not really sure we're completely comparing everything there. But as far as the sponsors and everything else, a lot of recommendations, I don't foresee any problems. I think we could probably make those corrections in next year's budget bill. I'm sure the governor's probably already thinking that. And we could probably get a lot of those changes made pretty rapidly. But I also agree that, you know, we have a new system that has been put in place over the last couple of years. Not only am I hearing it from you and the charters, but I mean, we've done a lot with the public schools, and they're saying the same thing, you know, give us a little bit of time to breathe here, at least see what these results are before you go changing anything else. So I think we need to start, you know, maybe fixing on the edges some of those issues, but continue to look at additional reforms in education in general that has more of the money follow the student. And do away with this kind of turf battle that we've had over the years with the funding, because I think it's our funding formulas, we kind of mislead the public with the funding formula that, oh, these are our local tax dollars, when the reality is our local tax dollars are being used to subsidize what we're doing here at the state to a degree, and you know, people are kind of misled to believe that it's their dollars. Well, no, it's not. It's all state funding. It's all going for the students' benefits. And I think we as a state need to start fessing up to how our school funding formula has been working and that, or hasn't been working, and try to go down that path as well.
Alright, just do a time check. Okay, we'll try to get a couple more questions and we'll open it up to the audience because I'm guessing there's a few people out there with questions. Alright, this next one will be for Darlene. And anyone can weigh in on this if you'd like. Actually, this is probably one that everyone can weigh in on, but I'll give her first crack at it. In my opening remarks, I mentioned the ongoing press coverage and some of the battles that have really been in the media and have sort of taken away from the education aspect of charter schools because it's on all of these sort of, for the most part, non-educational aspects, and there have been controversies and things like that. So when Andy's report recommends or mentions conflicts of interest and misaligned incentives, what role do you think any of those types of issues, like some of the specifics he gave, play in sort of the negative media coverage that charter schools have gotten? And if so, are there some that might be sort of an easy fix?
I have evidence personally of governing boards for charter schools signing conflict of interest statements back in 2007. There's some great practices that exist. Did I turn it off? Can you hear me? That exist. I think it's about making sure that it's on a larger scale. Conflict of interest is very, very important, that you don't incentivize economically, financially, a decision. We, some authorizers already by contract require conflict of interest, not only for their schools and governing boards through their charters, but they themselves as authorizers have to sign, their own board has to sign conflict of interest. I think you have to be careful in the world of law and policy about overreaction. There have been some interesting decisions made and been trumpeted in the media over the last couple of years that are troubling for any educator. But that doesn't mean the whole system needs more patches on a law and a series of policies that already looks like a patchwork quilt. Do you all know that there's been at least 19 fixes to charter law in Ohio since it was created? I think Ohio wins the honor of the most fixes to its law in any other state in the union. We're going to have to look that up. My point is, before I pass the mic to anyone else that has comment on this, is yes, it's important to see where the problems lie, but if we have all those fixes, if we're going to do something again, let's be mindful, let's investigate thoroughly, let's see what scale and scope of the problems are, and then let's narrow in on making a revision that makes a difference, not for the adults in the room here, but for the students that have an opportunity to use quality education where they might not have without charter schools.
I think as we look at Ohio's charter laws and the 19 different changes that have been made over a relatively short period of time, it's time that we really question, is the current legislative language coherent enough to tweak anymore? And I would say it isn't. I think it's time for a complete rewrite of the section in the code, where you look at how each of these pieces play against each other, and you avoid unintended consequences. You try to make sure that everything is in alignment, that we, as we look for new ways of funding charter schools, for example, you can't tweak that into the current law. And I think we would be doing a grave disservice if we just layer a few more changes on top of the existing law. I think it's time to all give very, very thoughtful consideration to what this law should look like, so that at the end, we have one that the charter community understands, that the public understands, that is transparent, it's accountable, and it provides those resources to our charter schools to replicate and thrive. We often think of the law as being used just to shut down existing schools, and I don't think that should be our approach at all. Our approach should be, how do we write laws that will actually help the charter school sector do better and thrive? And I think that's very possible, and that would be the direction I would choose to go on this.
Yeah, I think when I hear Andy's recommendations, to me, I'm not a policy person, but they seem pretty commonsensical to me. To align incentives to the right policy makes the most sense. So 2 parts to my answer. One, I think I just want to make sure that people that are developing the policy and the laws understand the context of what's happening in the actual school buildings. I'm all for accountability, and I think something needs to happen when schools are not performing, for sure. I think because of some of the things we've put in place, we've done a good job on the results front. But at the same time, there's things that most people probably aren't thinking about when they're drafting policy and law that affect us. So for the last 5 years or so, I was the building principal of our 6th through 8 charter school. And because of the way the law works and the way we're set up legally, we're a standalone district. So we inherit all of our kids from other districts in 6th grade. The average kid comes to us in 6th grade about 2.5 years behind in reading and math. And because we're just in middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th, all the 6th graders are new, and we replaced open seats at 7th and 8th grade. So that means 50% of our kids are brand new to us that school year. And we're going to be held accountable for their results about 8 months later when they take the state test, and even earlier now that we're giving PARCC. So again, hold me accountable, hold my feet to the fire. There has to be urgency because these kids have to be caught up and given a great education. But we also have to understand when we write this law, this policy, who these kids are, who's in the buildings, and what schools are working with. With that being said, I can't think of anything in that report to me that doesn't make sense. I mean, if 1/3 of our kids are making the progress that they need, something has to change. We're not getting the results that we should be getting. And I'm talking about progress results, not achievement results. And that's not an area where we should be falling down on.
You had the one chart up there earlier which showed different standards for different types of schools. Like dropout recovery schools have a slightly different standard. Those didn't come about by accident. Obviously they came about because, if you're trying to compare a dropout recovery school to a school where it's just a standard charter that's just trying to deal, you've got different issues dealing with those 2 schools. So the code was revised in order to reflect the circumstances of those types of schools. So, I'm kind of reminded of John Stossel, and he always gives his reports, and one of his bits is on raw milk. And why is it that the various states never changed the laws to allow raw milk to be consumed? And take a look at the dairy industry. They're not going to allow it to change because of just the way the market is. I don't think we're going to have wholesale changes of the overall law. Because the establishment is there. The education system is already in place. It's already working. We call it revised code, and we change it periodically as a result. And I don't, we can take a look at it. We can discuss that, okay, all these things need to be done. I think they need to be phased in if we're going to do it over a period of time. And I think that we need to be careful about trying to make full-scale changes and wholesale changes to the system, because the system is the way it is because of the free market. The free market is bugging we, the legislators, and there's going to be in the House 99 people going 99 different ways. And I don't think you're going to see some of these changes that are going to be wholesale. I think some of the common sense ones, the easy ones, those will fly through. But I think we need to be cautious on making the assumption that we're going to be able to change the laws rapidly.
There is a microphone in the back, and maybe it'll work better. So if you want to line up, if you have questions. If not, I can keep going on with questions, but we've got another 15 or 20 minutes. I think I saw Matt's hand. Go ahead.
And I'm Pete Gallier with the Cleveland Transformation Alliance. And one question that comes to me, thanks for the great report, Andy. You know, and certainly the idea that charter schools need better funding in the long run theme in Ohio. But I wonder, like, given what we know about the quality issues in Ohio, what would you see that would need to be placed if we were to increase funding for charter schools that would also address quality? So you're not just giving more money to schools that are performing well, given that you can't, it's hard to say, well, we're just going to give more money to better schools, that's problematic as well. So what would you all see as how to address the funding issue while also keeping in mind the quality issue, so you're not just giving more money to poor performing schools, given the issues we see with free market education not really working as perfectly as we would like?
To me, I'm gonna jump off there because that's a particular sticking point for me. You know, I think we should incentivize schools that are doing well, especially in this, market where we want to replicate good schools and probably stop doing bad schools. However, I think what we're missing here is there's a basic issue of fairness. If a kid walks into a public school down the street and it's funded at $15,000 in this town, and he walks down the other way and he walks into my public charter school and he's funded at $9,000, it's the same kid who qualifies for free and reduced lunch, who comes 2 years behind, who's a student of color, who has not been served by their traditional public school. Why are we not treating them the same way? It's separate and it's unequal and it's just patently unfair in my mind.
This is exactly one of those issues that I was referring to a minute ago when I said we can't just tweak the law. This is a major change that we're going to have to make in the law to have equitable funding. We have a real chicken and egg problem here, frankly. The public will go crazy if you just come along and add a bunch of money to charter schools that they see failing. We're going to have to figure out a way, and I don't think anyone has the answer at this moment, but it's one of those things we need to work on together. We need to figure out a way to phase this in so that we are rewarding schools that are performing well, so that we can, but at the same time, maybe it's that bubble group in between. They're doing okay, but we can move them to better. If we can figure out a way to use additional funding to incentivize higher performance, that's the only way we're going to end up getting where we need to go. Because I don't think you can start there with that equal funding when you come along and you slap an extra $4,000 or $5,000 on a school that's been a D or an F for a long time. So that's a challenge.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. So the chronology of events, like getting this staggering, like when you do real accountability and increase the funding, is a political calculation that's suited to make. But I do want to say how important it is. If you think about there being probably a two-set problem here. One is, I'm sorry to say, I think you're too light on accountability. You have too many low-performing schools that have been going on for too long. That's what I call the left side distribution problem of the bell curve. You got too many schools on the left that aren't doing their job. You got to deal with that. And I agree with the sentiment of letting ink dry. You don't want to constantly do an accretion of policies, changing. You got to let something stick for a while, but eventually you have to do something about that. But all of the cities where there are remarkable charter school results, they're not just remediating problems. It's on a deficit mindset. They are constantly thinking, how do we create an environment where we can create, develop, and grow high-performing schools for high-poverty kids? And that's the right side of the distribution. And in all of these cases where you guys stand out is you're not creating enough of those great schools, you're not attracting them from other places, and they're not expanding. So what is fascinating is across the nation now, depending on who you ask or how you count, there are probably 24 dozen what we would consider high-performing, high-poverty charter networks. Organizations that have as a core competency building great schools for low-income kids. These didn't exist 10, 20, 30 years ago, but we have them now. And it is a total seller's market for them. They are great at what they do, and every state wants them to come. So if you are Eva Moskowitz running Success Academies in Manhattan and doing an outstanding job, everyone is at your door asking you to come. She and Rocket Ship and KIPP and all the other networks have a checklist of, if you want us to come to your state, can you provide us the following? For example, equitable funding that is adequate to meet our needs, a school facility, transportation that will enable us to get the kids that we need, and an advocacy apparatus that will be protected. Lots of states can say yes, 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 yes. Ohio, unfortunately, can't say yes to those things, so you box yourselves out of attracting great places, great operators. And then what's interesting about your distribution of schools is you don't have the right side bump. Every state that I'm looking at has a normal bell curve, but then on the right side, they have a disproportionate number of really good schools. Every state that are starting to expand, I think because of your policy environment, great school operators don't have the money necessary to expand. They actually look at an additional kid as an additional deficit because they got to go and fundraise more. That totally thwarts your ability to drive a high-performing sector if the best of the best cannot grow. That's what's really leading. In Boston, the reason why they have such great results is they have a handful of operators that are expanding up to the cap and are doing an outstanding job. It's not 50 different operators, it's a handful that are doing really well. Right now, your policies don't enable you to do that exact thing, and you've got to solve the funding problem.
My name's Beth Lear, and I want to ask you a question and make a request based on my role as a charter school board president and as the former education policy analyst and researcher for the Buckeye Institute. My question, well actually my request first. We know there's not an endless pot of money. So when we talk about funding, the idea that we can just infuse it and then it'll come from somewhere, as a taxpayer, I know it's not going to be that easy. So my request is, could we maybe consider the number of mandates? Charter schools were originally created to be centers of innovation where, unlike the district schools, the mandates were very limited. And we've seen since '97, almost annually, an increase in the requirements for charter schools at the same rate about as the increase for mandates for district schools. And actually, I think both sectors could really benefit from a look at what are we requiring them to do. Is it really beneficial to the educational outcomes that we're looking for? And in some cases, I don't think it is. So that's my request to help on the funding side. But my question to you is, when I was doing research on charter school issues for Buckeye, one of my frustrations was not having quality data. And as Representative Brenner referred to earlier with the apples to apples comparisons, it's hard for us to do that. I don't know how costly it would be, so we need to consider, could we begin to gather data on the kids in the community schools to show what district they would be in? So when we're looking at comparing them, we're not just comparing them overall to all of the other school districts, but we're also comparing them to the schools they would have been in to see how are they actually doing. Because I think that's going to give us an even more valid comparison than the overall.
Let me start with the first part of it, well, actually your second part. Credo's analysis did go down to the school level, so they would look at where students came from to make the basis and sort of draw what they call the virtual twin methodology for making the comparisons. I think there's always ways of doing this. We should continue looking for more data because it is critical we truly understand what's going on. As far, to my knowledge, and Andy can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the most robust methodology next to a gold standard where you sort of have a wait list of kids and you got kids who applied and got in and got a scholarship or got into the charter school and those who didn't, and you track performance outcome. Next to that, Credo's methodology is seen, I think, nationally as one of the best. As for the other question, or either the data question or the first one,
I wish I could go back to 1997 and say, could charter schools be everywhere in the state of Ohio? It is a statistical issue that we're the unique state that limits charter schools to the urban 8. And yet when we do our data analysis, we sometimes forget where we're restricted to. Now add on to that a layer that some of our schools can go statewide. So I have issue, or I'm trying to figure out, should I say, the Credo report, because their data does not match the Ohio context of where our students are. They give credit for better educating African American socially, economically disadvantaged, and yet they say our percentage is around 50%, and it's higher. So as I look at their data, I wonder if it's skewed because of the Ohio context. It took me 6 weeks. I'm not proud of how long it took, but if you'd like to see the OAPCS analysis, step by step, I tried to pay attention to the Ohio context, took out e-schools, took out dropout recovery, took out 50% plus special education schools, and compared the urban 8, where we're located, with urban 8 charter schools. I'll be glad to send that to you.
I totally agree with Darlene that sometimes our data isn't really good. We collect a lot of data here in the state, but we aren't very good at analyzing it. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done in that area. There used to be something called, I'm trying to remember the exact title, Legislative Oversight Office. Colleen, you're usually good at which was sort of a branch of LSC that did a lot more data crunching for the legislature, so that they were really dealing, when it came to education issues, with really good numbers, and I would love to see that office reopened.
There's one thing that some state accountability, and even New York City was the first one I saw that did this. In their accountability system, they do, of course, their A through F rating and all types of metrics on growth and proficiency, but they also do a like school comparison. So in New Jersey right now, you could go to the New Jersey State Report Cards and pick any school, and it'll give you all the demographics and all the achievement. But then at the end, it says, this school, just made up, John F. Kennedy Elementary School, has 60% white, the rest African American, 30% low income, 22% special education. Let's find the schools in the state that are the most demographically similar to John Kennedy Elementary School. And every school has a comparison group of 30 schools. So you can match on a year-to-year basis how schools are comparing to like schools. And what this does is it opens your eyes, both about schools that you think are low performing, compared to similar schools, they often tend to be higher performing. And the other side of the coin is also true. A lot of schools that really think they're awesome, when they're compared to schools that have similar demographics, aren't nearly as good as they think they are. This is a relatively simple task that a big longitudinal data system can do. And I think this would be essential, like really, really helpful for your state, just so you can get a handle on, especially your special education and your dropout recovery schools, compared to like schools, how are they doing? It's no good question.
Andy, you've seen a big range around the entire country. Can you talk about the demographic caps and the fact that we can only open in the urban 8, Lucas County, and the bottom 5%? Does that make a difference? Would that yield more apples to apples comparisons?
So there are other states that have similar geographic constraints. The one that comes quickly to mind is Missouri has had this for a long time. You can start schools in Kansas City or St. Louis, full stop. One of the blessings of this virtual twin model that Mackie and the Credo has done is you're actually comparing students to like students. So Cleveland kids are being compared to Cleveland students. So that should wash out the fact that you are limiting it. I have to admit though, when I read the report, what struck me was this, I should remember what figure number it was, but if you look at the Credo report, there's one graph about halfway through showing the different performance of charter students in different, what we call them, geographic designated zones. So urban, small urban, rural, town. And when I saw the graph initially, I was like, well, that's strange. How in the world can you have so many rural kids in charters given your law, or town, e-schools? And what's striking is how low performing, like the deficit of your town students and your rural students. This is just speculation, it's inference on my part, based on your law and what I know. It seems to me that your e-schools, if those are the ones that only are able to serve town and rural kids, that might be a large to substantial part of the problem here. And it's unusual. Other states that have these geographic constraints did sort of like jump over and say, a reasonable thing would have been said, go from the big 8 to the entire state. You guys did it, let's do the big 8 to disadvantaged areas, and oh, let's just do e-schools that can sort of like do everybody without saying district by district we could do it. I don't know of any state that's like that, and it does pose this e-school problem.
Just real quickly, I just want to say, I hope that we take the news that came from these 2 reports, we take it to heart and we act on it. And we don't, this is not the Akron Beacon Journal, this is not the OEA that has come up with this report. Credo and Bellwether are friends to the charter movement. So don't be tempted to do what I'm already starting to hear, and people make explanations and explain away some of the conclusions in this report. We have a problem, and we need to make our charter schools better, we need to make them thrive. So confront the problem, don't try to brush it under the table.
Well, we can compare the charters, and whether we downplay it or not, the reality is our public schools compared to these other states, I don't know what kind of word I would want to use other than the word is they're not as good as even Massachusetts. I mean, for crying out loud, we've had a debate in the Ohio House over the last 2 years over whether or not to have Common Core. And interestingly, the conservatives in our caucus want to adopt Massachusetts standards prior to Common Core. But they're not looking at everything coming from Massachusetts, whether it's their funding model or even their overall schools. So, I mean, if you're comparing whether you're talking charter or you're talking public, all of our schools need to improve. And I think that we need to be looking at them in general, the education system, to see, okay, why is it we're in the system that we're in right now? What can we do to change that model so that in the next 5 to 10 years we have a system that is vastly improved over what we have right now? And I think we need to look at this in the long run and take a look, okay, what do we need to tweak in the law, or what do we need to change in the law that will in the long run make the difference, and in comparison to these other states and what they're doing, whether it's with their charters, whether you're comparing the students in these areas that have the problems or not. Another example, in the prior General Assembly, we tried to pass in the Ohio House Bill was 136. It was Representative Huffman's bill, and I think he had 35 co-sponsors or something on it. And this would have allowed the money, $5,000, to follow the student to any school district anywhere in the state of Ohio. I think we were overrun by a Mack truck, and then a couple tanks and a few other things. The bill died in committee and didn't go anywhere. So I think before we jump and assume that we're going to be making some changes here that we do need to make, I think we need to get the public on board first. If we can get the public on board, then I think the changes will occur.
I want to clarify something for Andy, because he's not from our state. It is not just e-schools that are at town and rural. Some of our lowest performing authorizers, I'll be glad to send you the ranking from ODE this year, are traditional public traditional public district authorizers. They are in rural and they are in town. So be careful about blaming that all on e-schools, because there's other authorizers and schools in that mix. They perpetually perform poorly on the ranking of authorizers.
I want to thank you all for coming today. Now for a shameless plug. Beginning in January, we're going to be having a speaker series that Fordham will be hosting. We hope to be doing it with partners. At the end of January, School Choice Ohio and Fordham will be partnering to bring in Dr. Matthew Ladner from the Foundation for Excellence in Education, who will be discussing education savings accounts. So that invitation should be there, coming out in the next couple weeks. So it'll be the last week in January as a part of our National School Choice Week celebration that's all around the nation. So just wanted you to be aware of that. If you have other ideas for speakers, there's 11 more months. And I know how you like to come down here for breakfast. So we'd be happy to co-host some of those events with you. We really want the topics that are pertinent, that are relevant for discussion. Sometimes people will agree, sometimes they'll disagree. I think the ESA one will be fascinating in terms of seeing everyone's reactions. And we're, again, very thankful that you come out today, and everyone have safe drives.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.